and other folks, because I hear that other JCC people are joining from different parts of the country. If you want, in the chat, if you want to type in what city you're in right now, you can do that at some point during the program, so I'll get a sense of who is watching. You don't have to. But I'm really pleased to be here today to talk about the Museum of the Southern Jewish Experience, which will be opening soon in New Orleans, Louisiana. Now, usually when I do these programs, they are for congregations or JCCs or sisterhoods or Hadassah groups from in the South. So I am very excited to talk to folks in the Chicago area, but I'm wondering also if you have relatives or ancestors who lived in the South at some point in the past. I would also love in the chat for you to type in, you know, a little story. It doesn't have to be much. You can just say Selma, Alabama, great grandfather, or whatever. Because the Museum of the Southern Jewish Experience isn't just for Southern Jews. It's not just for Southerners. It's not just for Jewish people. It's for everybody. So I'm always interested in folks from outside the South, where they're, what kind of connections they might have. Okay, that's enough of that. I'm the executive director. I am from the South. I grew up in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, but now I'm in New Orleans, Louisiana. And I've worked in museums most of my career after I got out of graduate school at Tulane University. My most recent museum gig was as the director of education for 18 years at the National World War II Museum, which is located just 2 blocks from where my new museum is going to open. So I'm very excited to be bringing a new experience to New Orleans and to all the folks who visit New Orleans. I'm going to share my screen. Let's see. Okay, can y'all see my screen? Yeah, good, excellent. All right, Museum of the Southern Jewish Experience. There is our building, which we don't own. We're only using part of this building. I'll tell you more about that in a minute. But what I want to make sure you see is our tagline. Our tagline is Shalom, make yourself at home. We didn't use Shalom, y'all, because everybody uses Shalom, y'all, and you can't copyright it. But what we're trying to do here is to create a museum that is welcoming, that everyone will feel comfortable in. It's not stodgy, it's not boring. So the Shalom is the Jewish part. The make yourself at home is the Southern hospitality part. So we're probably going to be sticking that on some coffee mugs and some aprons. So if you're looking for, you know, early Hanukkah presents, think about our online store. All right. Before we get into the museum itself, let's have some fun. I've got 3 questions for you. I know it's a little early. It's 11 o'clock. It might be too early to start drinking. Not down in New Orleans, but maybe in Chicago. So let's see if we can answer these, who can answer these 3 questions. Question 1, which city had the first synagogue outside of the original 13 colonies? Was it Charleston, Mobile, or New Orleans? If anybody wants to raise their hand and or just say it to yourself. Yeah, Hillary, what do you think?
It's Charleston.
It is not Charleston, because Charleston is in South Carolina, which was in the original 13 colonies. So now you're down to 2. It's either Mobile or New Orleans, and both have very old Jewish communities. But the answer is New Orleans. New Orleans was, of course, when there were 13 colonies, New Orleans was French and Spanish. But in 1828, the synagogue that today is Touro Synagogue was founded. It was founded as an Orthodox shul, later adopted the Reform rite. All right, that's question number 1. Question number 2, which sweet treats trace their kosher roots back to Savannah, Georgia? Is it Girl Scout cookies, Goo Goo clusters, or pecan pralines? Anybody want to give that a try? No? All right. It's Girl Scout cookies. When Juliet Lowe started the Girl Scouts in Savannah, Georgia, she asked 4 of her friends to become troop leaders. 3 of those 4 were Jewish women in the town. And later, when they decided to start selling cookies to raise money for the Girl Scouts, they went to the best bakery in town. It was called Gottlieb's. Gottlieb's was a kosher bakery. And so Girl Scout cookies started out as kosher. And I'm not sure if all the new varieties still are, but for decades and decades, they remained kosher, kosher delicacies. And the last question, which African-American musician was taken in by a Jewish family at age 7 and given his first instrument? Jelly Roll Morton, Louis Armstrong, or Buddy Bolden? Anybody? Our answer is Louis Armstrong was taken in by the Karnofsky family. Members of that family still live in New Orleans today. They were Lithuanian immigrants, and they let him ride on the back of their junk wagon as they went through the streets of New Orleans collecting junk, and he would toot on a little tin horn to announce that they were coming. And they let him, I think it was $5, to buy a cornet. Which he then paid them back. And for the rest of his life, Louis Armstrong wore a Jewish star necklace in memory and in honor of the kindness that the Karnofsky family showed him. So these are just 3 stories that kind of talk about how Southern Jews have been around, first of all, and have been integrated into our American story in some surprising ways. That's what the museum is all about. So, first question, what is the South? Because the South is a lot of different things to a lot of different people. For us, we consider the South 13 states: Texas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, Tennessee, Kentucky, Virginia. I know there's somebody on from Virginia. North Carolina and South Carolina, Georgia, Florida, even Southern Florida, even where all the New York Jews now live. It's still a Southern Jewish experience. Alabama, Mississippi, and of course the great state of Louisiana. And this is where the museum is in New Orleans. We happen to be right down the river from y'all. Things you throw into the river wind up coming past New Orleans about a week and a half later. So don't throw things in the river. Okay. Now, here's another question I get a lot from people down here. And they say, is this a new museum? Because I seem to remember there used to be a museum like this somewhere else. And the answer is that yes and no. Yes, it's a new museum. No, it's not. The original Museum of the Southern Jewish Experience was at Henry S. Jacobs Camp in Utica, Mississippi. Jacobs Camp is a reform summer camp for Jewish kids that I used to go to as a camper, and I was also on staff there. And in the 1980s, a lot of the small town Jewish communities were disappearing very quickly. And the camp would get phone calls saying, we're selling the old synagogue building. What do we do with the Torahs? Or, my grandfather died. I went up in the attic. There are all these records from his dry goods store that his father and grandfather had started. What do I do with those? So the camp decided to become a repository for this disappearing small town Southern Jewish experience. And they built a museum, and it was great for the campers to learn about their Southern Jewish history. The camp was very important because a lot of these kids coming from small towns, the summer was the only time they interacted with other Jewish kids. So it really helped to promote their Jewish identity. The problem was it was in the middle of nowhere. It was hard to get to. You had to make an appointment to go if you weren't a camper. And so very few people outside of the camp community ever saw this museum. So they shut it down in 2012. They looked for a new place and they chose New Orleans. New Orleans has a great tourism economy. New Orleans has an old Jewish history. New Orleans has Tulane University, which happens to have the third highest Jewish student population percentage in the country. Isn't that amazing? There's Yeshiva, there's Brandeis, and then there's Tulane. 36% of Tulane is Jewish. So that means they have this great Jewish studies program, and we offer internships for their students. So it's a great relationship we're building. This is proof that I was a camper and a counselor at Jacob's Camp. Somewhere along the line, I don't know, I lost the hair. They say it runs through the mother's side, so I guess I'll blame her. But because I went to the camp, because I worked at museums, because I studied Jewish history at Tulane, they found me and they hired me to get this place open. So here's our building. This is the part that we have, the ground floor and half of the second floor of this beautiful building. We have an option to get half of the third floor over this next year before the owners rent it out. I put it in green because we know what green symbolizes. So if you know someone who wants to see their family's name on half a floor of a Southern Jewish museum, just give me a little ring. I'll give you my information later. So we're hoping to grab that space. If you've been to New Orleans, if you're familiar with New Orleans, here's a picture I took from the roof, looking out toward the Mississippi River, so you can see the bridge. You can see the World War II Museum. You can see a couple of other museums, the Ogden Museum of Southern Art, the Contemporary Art Center. We're very close to what used to be called Lee Circle, that had a statue of Robert E. Lee, which was removed about 4 years ago. And there's a big debate in town about what, if anybody, they should put on top of that pedestal and what they should call Lee Circle. So I think they should put a big pound cake up there and just call it Sara Lee Circle, and just make it much easier, but no one's asking me. So we're in a great place for tourists and locals alike. We're right on the streetcar. New Orleans is a historic streetcar line, and we're right on the streetcar line. So great location. The building's old. It was built in 1916. So it has this beautiful exposed brick and exposed beams. And even though it was totally renovated, we kept the beams, we kept the bricks to give to give the visitor a sense of actually being in history as they're walking through history or through our exhibit. All right, I kind of hate this slide. I really need to change it. This is our floor plan on the ground floor, which has what we call our long-term exhibit. So I'm just going to go through this very quickly. You enter through the lobby to get your ticket, but that's also our museum store, with some Judaica and some tchotchkes and some Southern Jewish artists' art, that sort of thing. And then you go into our orientation theater. Watch our 7-minute film, which we're just finishing up right now, the production of that, to get a sense of what the Southern Jewish experience is all about and why people should care. And then we come into our first gallery. It starts way back in the beginning, the first Jews in the South, Charleston and Savannah, Richmond, Mobile, New Orleans, Tallahassee. If you know your geography, these are all ports. They're all on the coast. These are Sephardic Jews that are coming over, mostly from the Caribbean, trading sugar, trading rice, trading enslaved people. And we go from that early immigration, we talk about the other waves of immigration, the Ashkenazic who come in, or first the Alsatians who come in after the 1848 revolution, and the Germans. and then the Eastern Europeans after 1881 when the Tsar is assassinated. So we talk about that. We talk about the Civil War and slavery. We talk about peddlers and merchants. That's a big part of this because almost every Southern Jew started out as a peddler or a merchant. So that's what happens in Gallery 1. Gallery 2 is called Foundations of Judaism. It's not chronological. It's about what is Judaism. So this is really important for us to be able to be an outward-facing institution for non-Jews to come in and see what are Jews, what do they believe, what are the life cycle events, what are the holidays? Yeah, my coworker always disappears for a bunch of days in September. What's all that? Rosh Hashanah, what is that? Well, they're going to find out what that is. And all the artifacts in this gallery, of course, are from the South. Gallery 3 into the 20th century and beyond. So we have a Holocaust gallery that doesn't talk about the Holocaust in Europe so much as how Southern Jewish communities worked to get family members out before the war, and Holocaust survivors who moved to the South to make a new life for themselves after the war. And of course, they added so much, they contributed so much to their communities in the decades after World War II, most of all in the final decades of their lives when they started going into schools and sharing their experiences with young people. And so that that kind of thing, and that, of course, that's not just in the South, that happened all over the country, but we highlight some of those survivors. We talk about the civil rights movement. We talk about the small towns disappearing and people moving to the bigger cities. And we have some wonderful opportunities for people to sit down and explore their towns further. So, and then you exit through the gift shop, of course. Here are some renderings from our exhibit designers. If you've been to Philadelphia, to the National Museum of American Jewish History, we are using the same exhibit designers. They're called Gallagher and Associates. They also did the exhibits at the World War II Museum, so I've worked with them for years. Here's a rendering of our orientation theater. Here's a rendering of Gallery 1 and the funny thing is that when they make these renderings, what you wind up with is very different than what they drew, 2 years ago. However, and here's one of our timelines. However, I did want to show you, there we go. I did put in some pictures of the installation. So there are certain things that do look similar to what they drew 2 years ago. Other things, not so much. But I'm going to go back. Whoops, I'm going to go back to this slide because this shows some of our wonderful merchant and peddler artifacts. The South is agricultural. It used to be more so. They needed storekeepers. When the Jewish peddler came down the road from one farm to another, he was welcomed. He had bolts of cloth. He had pots and pans. He had tools. He had maybe some toys for the kids. When he made a little money for himself, he settled down in a town and opened up a dry goods store. By 1900, 35 to 40% of all retail stores in small towns were run by Jews. It's pretty amazing when you think about it. Almost every small town you could think of in the South had Jewish merchants on Main Street or around the town square. So these are some of our, the postcards are of Southern department stores. So they start as a peddler, then they became dry goods salesmen, let's say, and finally, many of them, people like the Niemans and the Marcuses, the Sachs family from Birmingham, Alabama. Neiman Marcus is, of course, was started in Dallas, Texas. Riches in Atlanta, Godchaux's in New Orleans, and Bon Marché in New Orleans. So we show those. Anyway, not all the history is, we're not proud of all the history. Jews owned people, enslaved people, at the same percentage that non-Jewish white people did. Jews had a tendency to own fewer people because they lived in urban areas, in cities and towns, and not on farms and plantations. But they oftentimes accommodated to the racial structure that was around them. They fought in the Confederacy. The man on the $2 Confederate note is Judah P. Benjamin. He was a senator from Louisiana. When Louisiana seceded, he quit the Senate and he became high-ranking official in the Confederacy. First, he was Attorney General, then he was Secretary of War, and he ended the war being Secretary of State. And he was on the $2 note. I'm not sure. I'll have to look up this fact, but I'm not sure if any other Jews have been on American currency, although Confederate currency isn't really American. Well, I don't know. Anyway, we talk about these things because they're important to talk about. It's important to have these conversations to understand your past, even the parts that you don't really necessarily, you're not proud of and you don't want to think about. So we do. This is Gallery 2, The Foundations of Judaism, another rendering that's turned out to not be quite correct. However, the stained glass windows hanging from the ceiling that Gallagher drew for us, we have created that exhibit. We asked synagogues from across the South to send us photographs of their stained glass windows. And we took parts of those photographs and we reproduced them, and they're hanging. We have 50 different stained glass windows hanging from the ceiling of this gallery. And it's a beautiful effect. We just put these up last week. Gallery 3, into the 20th century, talking about the Holocaust survivors that moved south. This is the New Americans Club in New Orleans. Every major city had a New Americans Club of Holocaust survivors who got together to socialize and network. We have some wonderful oral histories of Holocaust survivors from the South, not talking about their experience in Europe, but talking about what it was like to move to Birmingham, Alabama, or move to New Orleans, Louisiana. And there's some very interesting stories that we hear from these folks that maybe you wouldn't expect to hear, or that people haven't heard before. I'm not going to give it away. You'll have to come and see. Civil rights, our Civil Rights and Activism Gallery. On the left is Perry Nussbaum, rabbi in Jackson, Mississippi. His house and his synagogue were dynamited by the KKK. On the left, Rabbi Kahana from Houston, Texas, marching in Selma along with other clergy of other faiths. It's a complicated picture, the civil rights movement for Jews. Mostly Jews were on the liberal side. Mostly Jews were on the progressive side, supporting civil rights, but that could be very dangerous to go against the status quo. And so many people stayed silent, but many people didn't. In particular, rabbis. Rabbis who spoke from the pulpit or sermonized in support of civil rights oftentimes didn't have their contracts renewed. Not so much because the congregation disagreed with what he was saying, but because they feared that an outspoken white person speaking for civil rights might attract the wrong kind of attention and action against the community. So we talk about those kinds of things. We have exhibits on small town life. We have exhibits on Jews in popular culture. And we have one of my favorite objects of all is our Mardi Gras bagel. Mardi Gras, which we just sort of had, but not really, is a Christian holiday, right? It's the day before Ash Wednesday, and when parading organizations started, Jews weren't allowed to be in them. Today, there are two Jewish parading organizations. They're called crews. So there's the Crew de Jew and the Crew de Mishigas. And instead of throwing beads to the crowd, they throw these golden bagels. It's a real bagel. They paint them in gold and they decorate them, and then they shellac them so they will last for a long time. So this is our Crew de Jew bagel, which I will proudly put on display in the museum. At the end of the exhibit is where you sit down at some monitors and you can choose a state on a touch screen and further explore some of the history, the Jewish history and of that state, some of the artifacts that we have in our collection that aren't on display. And on the sides, you can visit the Encyclopedia of Jewish Communities, which is a much more in-depth look at different communities. For instance, if you touch Louisiana, then all of these different cities in Louisiana have entries about the history of the Jews in those towns. Tennessee, Texas, went crazy on Texas. There's a lot of folks in Texas. So you can really spend some time learning about the state and the city that you're interested in. The final activity in the museum is called Stitching Together Our Communities. This quilt is on display in Gallery 1. It was made by the Jewish Ladies Sewing Circle in Canton, Mississippi. They made it to raffle off to raise money to support the synagogue there. It's a beautiful artifact for its time. There happened to have been a crazy quilt craze going across the country at the time. So if you're interested in textiles, and it's just a beautiful thing, but even more so, it's a beautiful metaphor for people coming together as a community, all contributing a piece of themselves to create something that's bigger than any one of them, that's beautiful, surprising, a little crazy maybe, in order to support their community. So we have that on display, but what we're going to allow people to do is to sit down at a table and make their own quilt square. They're not going to sew it with needle and thread. It's electronic. It's, again, on a touch screen, but they're going to pick their fabrics. They're going to pick their patches that they want to put on them that represent them and their community. And then they're going to move their square into the middle of the table, and it's going to join with everyone else's square. And again, it's going to create something beautiful and diverse, because that's what we're trying to get across here. For Southern Jews, this museum is all about, hey, look, this is me. I'm in a museum. They're talking about my stories. For everyone else, this museum is about the American experience, shown through a slice of that, an immigrant community that has contributed in ways that maybe they'd never realized before. So here, visitors will understand that they themselves are part of that American experience, and their unique identity makes America and the American story or tapestry or quilt all the more rich. Second floor, changing exhibit gallery, classroom, offices, conference room, standard stuff. Not enough room, as you know. There's never enough room. I want that third floor. Want to get involved, want to help, want to support? We are accepting donations. I'm not going to belabor this, but one of our unique ways is we've created something called the Mezuzah Society. Folks that join the Mezuzah Society, we send them a beautiful mezuzah that was handmade here in New Orleans, and we ask them to send us a mezuzah of their liking, and we're going to put those on this wall. this mezuzah society wall, so that and people can dedicate their mezuzah to whoever they want. So what we're saying is, yes, thank you for the check. That helps to keep the lights on. But really, thank you for giving something of yourself. You're in a museum now. How many people can say, yeah, something of mine is in that museum? So this way, and what says home and welcoming and ownership like a mezuzah on the doorposts of our house and on our gates? So, so we're very excited about this. We've already got a few hundred of these mezuzot that we're going to put up very soon. Finally, we have a newsletter. If you want to keep up with what's going on with the online programming we do, with some facts about Southern Jewish history each month, you can sign up for the Southern Schmooze. And I'll add you. I just sent out the March edition 2 days ago, but if you sign up, I'll go ahead and send that out to you. It's a fun read, doesn't clog up your box. And finally, my email address. If you have stories of ancestors or even of your own stories of a Southern Jewish experience, if you have artifacts that you think the museum might want to have in its collection, email me, kenneth@msje.org, and we will chat. And that's me. That's my story. And I got nothing else to say. But if we have questions,
We
or
do.
people
We
wanna
do have
share,
questions.
great.
We do have questions. So you mentioned Tulane, and there are a huge number of Jewish kids from the Chicago area that actually go to Tulane, and secretly we call it Jewlane. So
Yeah, no, it's not so secret. What, they couldn't get into University of Chicago? What?
maybe. So we had a couple of comments that Louis Armstrong spoke fluent English, Yiddish, because of the family that took him in. And then who is this?
He also kept a box of matzah backstage. Whenever he was doing a show, he would have matzah because he liked to nibble on matzah. I'm not sure why that
Yeah,
is.
I'm not sure why either. We had someone visited the same camp when her daughter did an internship under Macy Hart.
Yep. Awesome.
Suzanne is asking if there's going to be a deli in the museum.
If only. I wish. We have so little space. And food service is a whole other level of source, with the different regulations and everything. So the answer is no. We have a growing celebrity chef here in town. His name is Alon Shaya. He's Israeli by birth, but he's American also. And he's got a couple of restaurants in town. And we were really hoping that he would open a restaurant. There's a little building next door to ours that's available. So I would love for him to open a little restaurant next to us. I don't know if it's going to happen. Right now, his next restaurant is going up in the new Four Seasons Hotel downtown New Orleans. So probably not. But if you know anything about New Orleans, we've got great food. The Kosher Cajun Deli. If you keep kosher, then you'll want to visit the Kosher Cajun Deli, which is a truly kosher place. And I can give you directions.
We, in our Holocaust Museum, they used to have a food service that was kosher, and that didn't last very long because food is difficult to oversee. So we understand that. Susan asks, are Jews really accepted in the South? She was on a program last night, Jews in Paris, and although there are many synagogues and over 700 day schools, there is a tremendous amount of anti-Semitism.
Yeah, this is the interesting thing, is that most people would think, or I think most people would think, that the South would be inhospitable to Jews. It's the Bible Belt. It's very racially stratified. It's agricultural, and Jews aren't agricultural, but it works for a few reasons. One is that synergy ugh, hate that word, between the merchants and the farmers. So they provided services after they became comfortable, running their store, enlarging their store. Then they started being civically and philanthropically involved, so that they really contributed to the growth and the well-being of their cities and towns. We have a map in the museum that shows over 200 southern cities that have elected Jewish mayors. And some of these are very surprising. Some of these are very small towns that, for instance, there's a place called Dumas, Arkansas. It's about the size of a postage stamp. When it was incorporated in the late 19th century, the first 2 mayors were Jews. It's like, what? How did that happen? Well, it's because they were the civically minded and civically involved people in the town, and the townsfolk voted for them because they knew they would do a good job. Galveston, Texas has had 5 Jewish mayors. Donaldsonville, Louisiana has had 5 Jewish mayors. More recently, Jerry Abramson, 5-time mayor of Louisville, Kentucky. So Jews were accepted. Now, there was anti-Semitism. It would rise exactly when you think it would rise, when times are bad. So when the cotton crop would fail and the farmers couldn't pay back the store owners for the supplies that they had promised, at the beginning of the year, they would go to particularly after the Civil War, when the banking system was non-existent in the South, farmers would go to the storekeeper. Storekeeper would say, all right, here's your seed, here's your supplies, here's everything you need. They'd write it down in a ledger. When the cotton comes up, bring it back to me, and that's your payment. And then the storekeeper would factor, they called it factoring, they would factor the cotton down the river to New Orleans, off to Liverpool or wherever. If the cotton crop doesn't come in, then what does the storekeeper do? The storekeeper can roll over the debt of the farmer to the next year, or can seize the lien, can say, I'm going to take your farm. And when that kind of thing happened, people can get resentful, and you start getting incidents of violence. So for instance, 1893 had a particularly bad year for cotton. And you saw a rise in acts of anti-Semitism. But for the most part, Jews in the South, particularly for the Christian religious people in the South, Jews are the people of the book. We're the OG. We're the original, chosen people. The Old Testament folks. And so there's something almost mythical, and magical about the Jew, dispensing wisdom across the land. If you read Faulkner, if you read Harper Lee in To Kill a Mockingbird, she's got a Jewish character, Mr. Levine. Certainly, if you read Confederacy of Dunces, there's several Jewish characters that are very funny. So Jews have always been in the South. They've always been part of the South. And this museum is going to surprise some people and teach them something, and hopefully delight them in meaningful ways.
Are the stained glass windows from defunct congregations? That came from Cheryl.
No, the ones that we have, so they're not actually stained glass windows. We had people take photographs of their stained glass windows, then we reproduced them. So those are still up in synagogues, but we do have on display one actual large stained glass window from Temple Beth El in Lexington, Mississippi. The congregation there, back in as late as the 1970s, I know the youth group there had 10 or 11 kids. But very soon after, this is 3rd generation, 4th generation already. They all went away to college, looked back at Lexington, Mississippi, at their dad's store, You know, it's like, yeah, we're not going to do that. We're going to move to Memphis or Nashville or Atlanta or Baton Rouge or Dallas, you know, that kind of thing. So they sold the synagogue to a church, and they took one of the windows out and donated it to us. So we will have one actual, it's from 1909. I think Bethel was built in 1909. So there you go. There's your answer.
Michelle is asking, is there a network of Jewish American history museums? They are from DC with a small Lillian and Albert Small Museum.
Sure. So I know Sonny Small. Yes, there's something called CAJM. I wish it was Cajun. That would be so cool. But it's CAJM, Council of American Jewish Museums. They have a website, and Jewish museums from across the country are members. Many of them are Holocaust centers. Several of them are shul, historic shuls that, have exhibitry and give tours of their building themselves. Some are art museum, Jewish art museums. But we work together sometimes to network, to educate each other, to share exhibits, that kind of thing. I'm on the board of CAJM, so I'm very proud to be able to serve in that capacity.
Riva wanted to know if there was ever an Orthodox community in New Orleans.
Yeah, the original communities were Orthodox. Of course, before there was Reform and Conservative, everybody was Orthodox. So that 1828 shul that became Touro Synagogue, it started out as Gates of Mercy, and then it split. Of course, we all know that story because they were using the German rite, and the Portuguese, the Jews of Portuguese heritage wanted a more Sephardic rite, so they started. They started Gates of Mercy. It was Dispersed of Judah first, and then they started Gates of Mercy as a Sephardic rite synagogue. But then a big yellow fever epidemic hit New Orleans and killed off a lot of people. And both both congregations were too small, so they got back together. And then by the 1880s, they adopted Minhag America, the Reform rite. So today there are 2 Orthodox shuls in New Orleans. There's 1 conservative and there's 3 Reform. So probably too many for how many Jews we have. We have about 11,000, maybe 12,000 Jews in town. Having all these synagogues means having all these rabbis, having all these executive directors, having all these gardeners, and you know the story. And now there's a museum. Oh my God. Yes, we've got all kinds, and the museum is non-denominational. We're not actually a religious institution. We're a private nonprofit museum. We happen to be telling a story that is based in a religious population, and we have very good relationships. As a matter of fact, I am sitting in Temple Sinai right now. They've given me a place to work until I get internet at my new museum. So, we're all friends now.
And one of the questions was, what is the Jewish population of New Orleans? So you answered that. Les said Sumter, South Carolina has a beautiful defunct synagogue with a couple dozen gorgeous early 20th century stained glass windows made in Atlanta.
Les Bergen is a good egg, and I like him, and I know that name because it comes up all the time when I do programs and things. So hi, Les. Glad to see a friendly face, although all the faces I'm seeing are friendly.
The synagogues that are conservative, are they really conservative, or are they egalitarian conservative? Because
the conservative
distinction here, at least in the Chicago area, between the 2.
Yeah, in New Orleans, there were 2. it's more confusing. There was an Orthodox shul that became conservative, and so there were two conservative communities, and they came together to form Shir Chadash. That's the conservative congregation is Shir Chadash, and I think they're pretty straight up conservative. I mean, it's New Orleans. Everything's a little looser here. We also have a thriving Chabad community. That
was my next question.
Yeah, not unheard of, but particularly because of Tulane, and they have all these wonderful student programs, and they do this big Shabbat dinner every week, so we've got quite a variety of Jewish experiences here in New Orleans, as do any major cities, across the South.
So this is a really funny coincidence. I just got an email from our chief operating officer, who's also a member of my shul, and his son is graduating from high school this year. And guess where he committed?
Tulane. Excellent. Well, feel free to share my information with that kid's father.
I sure will.
Mom, and I'll.
I sure will. What a coincidence.
Absolutely.
We had a question earlier too. So you have these interactive touchscreen kind of things. How is that going to work in the age of our pandemic?
Right. So it's interesting because this happened right in the middle of our designing this, this exhibit, and some things we had various flip books, like you would actually flip through these, to see more stuff, and we changed most of those to iPad kind of swipe. They're still flip books, but they're electronic flip books. And what my former employer at the World War II Museum has done is, when you walk in and get your ticket, they give you a stylus, just a little pen, with a rubber tip, because there's a lot of that kind of touchy stuff at the World War II Museum. And this way, there you go. And this way, all you have to do is you use that. And of course, we are developing all the protocols for cleaning. That's, you can find that everywhere. The state health department has guidelines. American Alliance of Museums has guidelines. The big hope, fingers and toes crossed, is that everyone gets vaccinated in the coming months. So we'll see.
Did you say that 1/3 of Tulane is Jewish?
I did say that. I said I think it's 36%, so it's a little more than a third.
So I do you know if they actively recruit at high schools in order to? I mean, you can't actively recruit Jewish.
I think it's historic. Tulane was had early on had less stringent restrictions and quotas for Jewish students. There were still some, but they were less. So Tulane sort of grew and had a reputation as a place that was friendly for Jews. And then, a lot of people are, what do you call it when your parents went to the same place you went to? Legacies or something, yes. So there's a lot of that. Like my mom went to Newcomb, which was the women's college at Tulane, so I think it perpetuates itself is what I would imagine. And New Orleans and Tulane has a reputation for being fun, and that kind of stuff. And so a lot of people come for that too. I've heard.
But it also floods there, so
It does flood, and we happen to be, the museum is on a high part of town. The whole city is not below sea level, like people say. The original part of the town is what is today the French Quarter. When the French showed up, they wanted to put a city here because it was near it was a good place for a port. And so they picked the highest ground around, and they built the city, which is now the French Quarter, and it's about 6 feet above sea level. As you move in, as the town grew, it grew into less favorable geographies. And so the middle of town is sort of like a bowl. New Orleans is interesting. As you get closer to the river and closer to Lake Pontchartrain, you're actually higher. So when you're closer to water, you're safer because the city kind of acts like a little bowl. So the museum's on a high part, which is good.
So how is the city was devastated with the last hurricane. And so how has that necessarily
Well, what do you
affected
mean you mean Katrina?
Katrina last two ago?
We've had a lot of hurricanes since then. That was 2005, girl.
I mean, has the city really recovered and
we have, the population's bigger than it was then. We have more restaurants. A year and a half after Katrina, we had more restaurants than we had before. Yeah, the issues that New Orleans will have moving forward is the same issues that all of coastal America will have, which is human-made climate change and rising sea levels and worse storms. And, the ice storm that Texas just had is, can be related to so all that stuff is not good. And this is totally off topic. So, but there are also, there are social aspects too, about it is that since we're a tourist-based economy, this COVID really hurt all the restaurant workers, all the hotel workers, that kind of thing. So as everyone gets vaccinated and things come back, the museum world, people in museums are suffering down here. So we're really looking forward to things getting better and people coming back, and they will. The Tourist Commission already, predicts the end of this year will be a much better time than the end of last year.
When is the museum scheduled to open?
You have to put another quarter in to get that answer. So we hope to open, this is being recorded. How wonderful. We hope to open in May. What we call a soft opening. We're not going to have a gala opening where we invite all of our supporters to come in, because it's too early. We don't want people flying in from across the country. We'll save that until the fall. But we will open soon. As a matter of fact, tomorrow, my visitor services manager has her first day. I just hired a visitor services manager. So we'll be getting our museum store, that's her portfolio, ready to go. And we're getting closer. The internet gets put in supposedly tomorrow. So it's happening.
All right. Well, great. This was quite interesting for me. I hope for everyone else. And part of why we're doing these programs is because we hope that when things open up, that people will really, consider going to visit all the places that we've taken them on tours over the last year. So
we're gonna design some experiences for folks, if they want to come in, certainly as a group, come see the museum, get the Jewish walking tour of the French Quarter, go to this shul, go to this restaurant. So we'll take care of you.
Sounds great. Thanks everyone for joining us. Next week we have our rescheduled tour of Frank Lloyd Wright's Cedar Rock. Also, if you're interested in more thoughts about the civil rights movement and the South, we are showing Shared Legacies beginning on Sunday morning. I put the link into the chat for that. And we're also getting a tour of a beautiful artist's tapestry next week. She was a Holocaust survivor, and her husband shares how she used these tapestries to kind of let her emotions about being a survivor come out. So thank you so much for joining us, Kenneth. It was great. Everyone, thank you and take care.